everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. It's May the 20th, 2025, 11 a.m. here on the East Coast of the U.S. And, well, it's just always a pleasure to have our good friend Morić back for a monthly check-in. And, I've been watching your Twitter feed. I should say X feed, but I always say Twitter just so you know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, but I saw yesterday you were on another show in which you were kind of concluding that globalism is inevitable. It's not going to. There's no way that we can go back. And so I thought I'd caption this show, USA, 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 USA. Is sovereignty dead, or am I wrong? Do you still feel there's some hope for restoring the Constitution and Bill of Rights and all that good stuff?
Well, I was actually thinking about that when you posited it. When I woke up to when I logged into X, because I'm like, because I knew I was coming on John's show, and I see your message in the link, and you mentioned sovereignty. And on the one hand, what I thought was one of my better interviews. The really good folks at Collapse Life, they've started a really proper podcast, and they're doing it right, I think, in all regards. Great guests, great design, great format, good hosts. Shout out to them if they're listening. But I was gonna say, on the one hand, what I was stating was more like a doctor making a diagnosis, an assessment, right? So it's not
Right.
like what I want, or this is just what I see at the moment. But when I was thinking of sovereignty this morning, on the one hand, I think that sovereignty is never dead. And for me, again, the most important is in the spiritual sense, sovereignty. They can never ever take our sovereignty spiritually. Speaking in Christ Jesus, you are free. So, on the one hand, I don't think it's ever a done deal. So I think you'll be happy there. And I just view it. It's a scale that slides back and forth. I just feel that, right. I mean, I don't think it's ever, if it slides to the scale of less sovereignty and more totalitarianism, it can't stay there forever, I think. So it's just, unfortunately, I think we're headed where we are now, where the momentum has picked up, where the scale is sliding towards, is away from sovereignty and towards this global tyranny. And I think I said in the interview that ultimately it's doomed to fail from a spiritual perspective, but also from a secular perspective, because often these totalitarian systems, like when you study complex systems, when things get too complex and too many moving parts, it just can't go on. And then everything, I think, in life, I think it's a general principle of life, everything's got a cycle of a peak and a decline, right? So if you have like a system, whether it's an operating system or a car or a human being or a plant, an empire, it rises, it reaches a peak, and it falls. And so I think the only danger is how long we'll have to live with whatever is on the road ahead of us.
Well, I'm personally with you on the sovereignty issue of my own desires to choice. I can choose to comply or not to comply as my conscience dictates. In a religious sense, that sounds great, but I, of course, as a trial lawyer, or anyone who studies the law learns to lean not upon my religion, but upon the legal structure of the United States for supporting my rights to choose, my body, myself, for instance, my right to get on a soapbox, if I can find one, and speak my piece, my right to address my lawmakers and tell them where they're wrong and what they need to do better. And basically, the whole idea of physical freedom from unwarranted, searches, seizures. The whole idea of human rights that I rely on is the one that is in the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution. So far as citizens are concerned, it doesn't seem to be under threat here, except for with regard to free speech. I am not in tune with the administration basically taking all human rights away from people that they call illegal immigrants and just shipping them off into a third world or a prison or some place where they might not ever see the light of day again, for all that our administration knows. But as far as being an American citizen, I think that's the safest, best status for a human being right now, legally. So that's I guess where I wanted to take the discussion is the Constitution going to fade away according to your professional prognostications? Is the Bill of Rights going to be antiquated and substituted by some formula from the UN that will, have lots of ways of them avoiding the strict language that our founding fathers put in those 10 amendments? Anyway, that's my comeback for what you were saying.
Well, I think we're in that process of technocracy. Before getting to that, I just published my weekly analysis last night, and I was just laughing because you have Dan Bongino and Crash Patel. I like to invent nicknames. They came out and they gave, I think, their first interview to Maria what's her face at NBC.
Maria, what's her face? Wait just a minute.
Bar something.
You're talking about the great Maria Bartiromo.
Yes, her. Her last name. I can't remember say it. And I mean, come on, John. It's like they said they came out and said Epstein killed himself, and then
I saw that. Oh yeah.
And then they said with Trump's assassination thing, there's no there. It's kind of like we're back to square one. They've pulled one on us. So they've rebuilt trust, and I think I think it speaks for itself that they're just this new regime that pretends to fight the deep state is, again, the deep state. It's like you can't escape it. You can't get away from it. But getting back to your point, we are moving into technocracy, into scientific dictatorship, and it's a global. It's global. It's like this global blob. It's like an alien invasion taking over the nations. And I mean, just on globalism, I caught two interesting points yesterday. On the whole multipolar thing, and things are starting to crystallize a little bit. They talk about how they want multiple reserve currencies. And I got that from one article from China Times. And before I even read the second one, which was talking more about that, I realized, that sounds a lot like IMF special drawing rights, SDRs, which is a basket of multiple currencies, which they have been for decades planning to be the new world currency. And then I came across this other article out of an Italian in Europe saying that the road to world government essentially is paved. Basically, we need to have a multipolar world government based on regional unions, and the EU is the model. And he says a larger use of the IMF special drawing rights, the only multi-currency asset issued by the IMF as an anchor for regional currency unions. So, there's that process is going along. And then if you talk about the U.S. administration, they're building out at all levels. The facial recognition is being implemented. I just learned this week they have something that goes beyond facial recognition now. They don't even need facial recognition, although it's the easiest for them. They have a system which can track all of your other attributes, your gender, your clothing, your body, other things, and figure out that it's you. And so, that whole digital sphere. So how much is the Constitution valid if you're living in this sort of techno-fascist society where everything's run by algorithms. I just read United States of Amazon. So the US Amazon might buy or take over the USPS, and so and that's a danger, because I was reading in the article, it said the USPS has, okay, they're losing money, but they're not so expensive. And they have a universal, I forget the word, but they have an obligation to cover the entirety of the US. But if Amazon comes in, they don't have any more of this universal, I think, contractual obligation. So the Amazon can leave half of the US on, the rural areas where a few people live, and they can jack up the prices. And so that's just one example of how it's being whittled away. And you had Trump and company go to Saudi Arabia recently, right? You saw that. And the only conclusion I came out of that for me was them making deals for themselves, the cronies in the Trump administration, and for the technocracy, or all of the folks who are there, Oracle, NVIDIA, making deals. Musk went and he made a deal he activated Starlink in Saudi Arabia and so forth. And so, again, I just see this momentum away from the Constitution and towards techno governance.
I read last week that in Singapore, you are now not allowed to refuse the vaccinations.
That's insane.
So, hey, roll up your sleeve and bend over, as the Firesign Theater used to say. That's where to me, if humanity's going to say no, it's got to be about injecting things into your own body that the government controls and you don't. If that's not the battlefield, that might be the hill to die on for humanity. And right now, it's happening right now. That the examples you gave are also quite chilling. But what is the most chilling of all is the lack of humans that are fighting back. And, so where do you see any hope that humans are actually going to say no to the coming needle in your arm or in your baby that may very well be engineered in such a way as to control that person's lifespan, health, and even mind?
Just this weekend, I was talking with some friends here in Mexico. They got to take one of their kids, little kid, for some surgery at the hospital. There's just, some issue the way he was born. Not that big a deal, but they have to keep going for consults or whatever. So it's at the hospital, just to hear the Mexican hospital, and they're asking me for some advice, because I'm well versed on the vaccine stuff, and I'm also I don't let anyone mess with me, right? It's like I dare any authority, with some of these things, I will fight right back. Fight fire with fire. And some Mexicans are not like that. They're meeker, right? And so these friends were telling me that they keep going in for these consults to prepare for their surgery at the hospital with the doctor, and the doctor keeps pressing them. Is your kid vaccinated? If the kid dies, it's your fault if they're not vaccinated. Like, they keep pressuring them, and they're asking me for, I don't know, sources or something. And I tell them, look, you can have President Scheinbaum and the Pope and Tedros the terrorist of World Health Organization come out and say vaccines will kill you, and they won't believe it, the doctors, right? I mean, maybe you've studied that psychology. Like, when you deal with people with conspiracy stuff, you can show them all the evidence you want, they're not going to hear you. So I said it's futile experience trying to convince the doctors, but the least that you can do is give a firm response saying, like, who are you, something like that. And so that's just an example how people are being pressured here in Mexico to just go to the hospital and they're talking like that to you. Will people wake up? Unfortunately, I don't think it's until it's too late. That's what I mentioned in the other interview. Orwell saw it. It's human nature that until the boot is on your face, until people feel pain We saw that with COVID, right? So it's not, or in totalitarian regimes, until enough people, I don't know, were thrown. Solzhenitsyn talked about it, right? Remember when he said when the Gestapo was coming to the apartments up the hallway, like we had the opportunity, if half of us decided to descend upon the Gestapo or whatever, the Soviet guards, we would have won. But nobody did it, right? In the Soviet Union. Solzhenitsyn talked about that. So it's like they did the Russians didn't do it in the Soviet Union. There was the resistance in Nazi Germany, but again, not enough, few and far between. So, and in COVID, it was just a minority. So, I mean, just look at past history to see, are we going to have enough people? I think when the boot comes upon our face, you'll see a surge. But then, I don't know. It's going to be late in the game. So, I don't know. Or maybe we always win. It's like one of those Hail Marys. That's how we always defeat tyranny, no?
Well, once again, appealing to the heavenly, saints. But if
I mean, I don't believe in praying to Mary. So I meant that as a figure of speech, like a Hail Mary, like a last, like in the football sense.
All right, sorry. To me, it's about economics, and I think what's happened is that everybody believes that these pieces of paper, these $1 bills, are the only way to have money. And the only way to survive is to get these pieces of paper and store them up and make sure you have enough, like a squirrel hiding nuts away for tough times. And that's been a psychological coup d'etat against the common person that has gone on for a couple hundred years, and especially in the United States. It's kind of like a model example of how this happens. We fight for individual liberty. We have New England towns. We have really solid ideals of democracy. We are self-sufficient. We spread, from the coast inland, and we built, whole huge communities of yeoman farmers, all along the Piedmont, I guess I would say, from the coastal plain out up until the mountains. All of these people were self-sufficient. You have cousins over there and friends and all, and you would share crops and share labor and do things together, kind of like the Amish. The ideal idea of that ideal, the village that Hillary Clinton said it takes to raise a child in. It's still there in some little places, but along comes the undercutting of things like clothing. Clothing's a great example. When people were making their own clothing, you didn't need, somebody could make some, share it, and you could grow your own cloth or linen or flax or whatever you want, whatever you could grow in that area. But imported textiles come in and wipe out the local textile people. The same thing happens with lots of goods that otherwise people could be self-sufficient in. And the next thing you know, there's an employer comes in, sets up a mill in which people can make money and, go and do that 10 hours a day and 6 days a week for enough money to get by on. But the economic force of that foreign textiles, for example, is the wedge that the world global economy uses to come in and take away what we think of as the American dream. And that is, I've got my my own thing. I can live on my own land. I can raise my kids. I can take care of myself with growing the food, and I have my animals, and that whole thing. It existed for a while until the tentacles of British, generally international economics, comes in and undercuts the small business, the small farmer, and drives people to make cash crops instead of growing food. And that process has been going on for at least 200 years in the United States. So to me, the folks that say, let's go back to the land, let's have a commune, or let's just get off of the whole grid. They're dreamers. Some of them are able to do it, but the vast majority of people are so fixed in the idea that there is no alternative to this global economy. And that's where the problem is that once you become addicted to the global economy, then you are going to have to roll up your sleeve and bend over at some point. There's nothing left for you if you don't participate in the grid. You can't go out anymore. There's no more frontier. There's no more places where you can just go out and seek your fortune. So yeah, they've shut it down really, really tight. But I think the human spirit still exists, and as long as we find ourselves, look, I agree with you that Bongino and who was the other one that came out and said,
Kash Patel,
Kash Patel, he killed himself.
head of the FBI, right?
They are bending to the will of some power that is more powerful than they are. I think it's the same power that killed President Kennedy. I think it's the behind the scenes Murder Incorporated, that does what it's told in order to preserve the interest of some hidden parties behind the scenes. And many people can tell you who they are, or at least there's a lot of theories. But the idea that there is this blob, to use Mike Benz's term, that is going to grind you down if you fight against it. So I think that is something that we can recognize without throwing out the baby with the bathwater, in the sense of, yes, the MAGA people really do want that American dream. They want it back. They want somebody to be a champion that's going to lead America back into its sovereignty and the sovereignty of the individuals based upon the rights that, our forefathers and foremothers fought for and died for. And that heart is still there. And I don't think that just because there's a compromise made with the powers that should not be, that we can then write off the whole idea of making America great again. But what do you think?
No, as I said before, it's an eternal struggle. So it's not like, I'm not saying it's game over. I'm just diagnosing. Speaking of cancer, it's like, we have a cancer here, and we have to deal with it. I've mentioned before, I interviewed during COVID Robin Morić, an Italian, who brought up Umberto Eco's Eternal Fascism, which was new to me. That I'd heard of Umberto Eco before, never read that book, but Umberto Eco said that, and it makes sense, even beyond Umberto Eco. I think this is historical principle that, even from a biblical worldview, evil doesn't sleep. It's every generation we must contend with the evil that is recurring. We defeated, World War II generation. We have that age of prosperity, and then it comes back. And anyone can use their own examples. Here we are now, my generation fighting COVID-19, 1984 and all that. My father's generation, my uncle fought off the Serbs in the collapse of Yugoslavia. My grandfather was a Nazi prisoner. My grandfather died as a result of World War I. So it's every generation You got to keep pushing it back, which makes sense. I think your point on the economy is important. Matt Smith, who I've had on the podcast, he works with Doug Casey. They got a website, Crisis Investing, I think, and he wrote a fantastic Substack recently reviewing a book which discussed the Panama Canal, I think, over a century ago, and the building of the Panama Canal, and how these American engineers, even some of the women who were just like secretaries, they were making like over 100 grand. Like he was calculating in gold ounces, the value of their payment in dollars, and that these engineers were making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year as civil engineers, like basic stuff. And that he compares that to the salaries today. It's like we get a pittance. And I was going to have a guest yesterday that didn't show up. I guess going to reschedule. But reading their book, they were talking about money, which is defining it, store of value. And I'm like thinking today, the money that we receive is not a store of value. So it's not really money. Like the pesos that I get or the dollars that you get, it's not a storing our value. It's literally like just leaking. That's not money. What is it? But it was interesting. He made a point, and someone commented on this Substack that one of his followers in the 1990s, this guy was also an engineer. What he made in the 1990s was one third of what the Panama Canal civil engineers got. But still somehow in the 1990s, with one third, it's been diluted 2/3. He was still able to rent or have a home and buy a car and have a normal life. But then he said the engineers, so that was 1990, the engineers today in the 2020s get a third of what he was getting in 1990. And that today you can't, on that engineer's salary, buy a car and own a home and support a family. And that was like a really pragmatic example of where we are and how they have impoverished us just through money, the currency. And I was just thinking, like, no, it's not a store of value. Like everything is going up. It's like almost month by month, my internet provider jacks up their prices, food. In 10 years, property prices have tripled. It's insane. It's insane. Like this is not money. This is not a store of value. So, but to your point about, I was talking with someone else and I forget where it was, but I think it's a good. I want to get out to the rural, to the countryside, because you have more sovereignty there, because you're not subject to this system which you described, which it just wants to extract from you. It wants you to sign up to so many subscriptions and obligations and licenses and fees and blah blah blah, and then to pay that off, you have to be the hamster in the globalist, capitalist, cosmopolitan, urban wheel. But if you have a property and you're in the boondocks and you have your basics, like you don't need to subscribe to nothing, and so you'll make less money, but you have very little costs, and so you can
get some property.
Yeah,
that's the question. How much is the land?
Right. But I mean, if you have I had the option. My wife didn't want to do it. We could have sold our home here and for the same price, purchased a home on the outskirts of town where there's a well with water and green space in the house. So, I mean, it's doable. If you already own the property, you can just sell it and move, so if you're in that position. But, and then I was thinking you don't have to make so much money because, if you did things right, you can take a day off. You can take some days off. Like I think about when I visited Croatia back in the day. You didn't have to work like a maniac and stress every day. I got to get to work today. I got to pay the bills. Like if you're living on a farm, you don't have bills. You can just kind of, obviously got to do work, but it's kind of like there's not that intense, crazy pressure. But if you're able to set yourself up like that, you have just much more sovereignty and freedom. And I think people need to work towards that in different ways. Even if you're in a suburban or urban area, there are things you can. Someone mentioned in the chat earlier. I mean, just stop buying their stuff. Stop subscribing. Just don't comply. Say no. Have the smallest footprint that you can. Economically, I'm a big fan of minimalism, but don't feed the beast.
Well, so many points. I wanted to try to remember them, but let me just do this one about what you said. That's not money. That's just what it is currency. Okay, it's currency. That is a mark that you have transferred value from yourself to somebody else. And it's a very efficient way of getting business done because you don't have to carry sacks of gold around or anything else of value. You just use a paper. And of course, the banking system has made it even easier by creating the digital exchange system that the Bank of International Settlements is the core of, and they accept the idea of paper and meaning the same thing as gold, so that if I've got 100 tons of gold, but I want to sell it for something, then the banks will just say, well, we'll move that gold certificate from your column over into this guy's column, and you don't really have to worry about shipping all that gold, at least not at once. But the idea of getting your mind off of the physical thing that's valuable, which is the gold, and letting you think that the currency represents actually a store of value. It's not a store of value. It is a way to get business done. It is simply the lubricant of business transactions. And what they've done is that by having, and Guido Preparata, by the way, recommends for having expiration dates on currency. It's the first time I ever heard that, and I thought that that's brilliant, because what it would stop would be the hoarding of currency in order to undercut a market or do with the George Soros thing. Just take over vast amounts of the economy just by the fact that you had hoarded enough currency that you could do it. That idea that where we store our wealth is in currency is part of the psychological, wiki-wacky that they've convinced us to buy into. So, and then you're absolutely right. I mean, if you just look at the inflation over my lifetime, you see that I think a dollar right now is just worth a few cents of what it was when I was born, 1952. So we absorb that. That's a hidden tax, of course. Another way to put inflation is a hidden tax. And we allow it because we somehow have been able to run on that hamster wheel enough to generate enough currency to get our basic needs, and perhaps put something away if we think, that it's going to keep its value in dollars. But most people, if they have any money to save, they're going to put it either in stocks or in land, or more and more lately, in specie, in gold and silver. The idea that currency is money is a psychological trick that has separated the common person from the real money, which is assets. Real money is something that is going to retain its value, and a little piece of paper is not something that you can bet to retain its value, even though it says "In God We Trust" on it, even though it says this is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So what? That a dollar, a combination of people that decided to take the dollar down could take it down anytime they wanted to. We are surviving by a thread. And, you talk about using a basket of currencies or otherwise to kind of create a new currency. Well, this idea of two levels of money is kind of coming to the surface now, where there'll be like, big money, for the people that have real money, and the rest of us, we just passing these chits around like little bitty tiny depreciated Roman coins in the last days of the empire, and that's because they don't really need us anymore. Well, the human spirit has got to recognize this and do something to restore the idea that, yeah, my value is in my land, my value is in my my assets, and my value is in my community, where we all work together to protect each other and to keep out, those pernicious influences. The destruction of community, the destruction of family, it all is going on right now. And I might sound like Chicken Little, but the sky's falling, guys.
When you're talking about currency, I just thought, give me 1 second. I got it right over here somewhere. I think I have one bill here. I just realized in my lifetime, because I'm also Croatian, twice just in my lifetime. I never really thought of that, or that would have happened. Our currency was destroyed. You had the Yugoslav dinar that, while my parents were living in Croatia under Yugoslavia, they had the dinar that died after the war finished. As soon as the war started, and then we had the Croatian kuna. So in the 80s, when I was still a kid visiting Croatia under Yugoslavia, we had a currency. Then that died, and then they put a second currency, the Croatian kuna. This is 20 Croatian kuna. This was printed in 2012, and 2 years ago, it was killed. So we've gone through, just in my lifetime, 2 currencies, and now we have the euro, which sucks, which is horrible. But to your point, my computer had a problem recently. My hard drive. I've always been this way. I've never understood people who never paid off their credit cards, because it's kind of the principle that what you say. I don't want to accrue interest, pay debt to anyone, and I want the hard asset. I want to quickly transfer out of fiat to hard assets. I had to spend almost $400 on a new SSD, and I didn't think twice. I'm like, take my money, give me that hard asset, because this computer, it's a high-end gaming device. It's got value as a tangible physical asset, more than those numbers in my account. I can resell it, and I had to buy a heat sink. I never even knew these existed. This is like a 40, I don't know what I paid, 20, 30, $40, because my hard drives are heating up because it's hot in Mexico, and where they're located in the computer, because I render videos. And so I bought like this, and this thing has value as well. I'd rather have this than 20 bucks, but and my other point, just what you were saying, the U.S. recently, Moody's downgraded the U.S. for like the first time since 1919, and you're seeing all these articles. This was in my weekly analysis. Many of the mainstream papers now, Financial Times, Project Syndicate, are talking about peak America. We've reached peak America, and the dollar is going to be replaced soon. They're talking about the euro, which is interesting, but market sniper Francis Hunt, who I've had on my podcast, he's a financial expert. He said something interesting. He's saying we're looking at a debt-based collapse, and he gave a solution, which is, it's common sense. I've thought about it for a long time, and the fact that he's saying it kind of made me feel better. He says, what can you do? Get a farm with gold, hens, chickens, beef, water, and 125% solar system with batteries. And then he also mentioned some cryptocurrencies, XRP, Ripple, and then some others that I don't know what they are, XLM, XMR, TRX. But I think that's that's basically all that you can do is having these real assets,
Yeah, I know. But most people don't. They're doing that currency thing as if, this currency is real money. It's not. It's just a way for you to get your groceries, without having to carry something heavy around.
But I'd argue, like, a lot of people, like as you described it, that they're in that situation. There's a certain number of people that are living paycheck to paycheck. So in this moment, they can't. But I think there's another big segment of people that are further along the scale, where they're not living paycheck to paycheck, but there are things that they can begin to do where they can quickly extricate themselves, they can do a number of things to get real assets and stuff like that, and so we just gotta get at it.
Now, I want to go back to an earlier comment that you made about, the cycle and how, we had World War I and, the World War II, and then we had prosperity and the greatest generation, and that was good times. But it wasn't really. It was setting us up for what is happening right now. And, did we win World War II? I don't think so. I think the bankers won World War II. I think Wall Street won World War II. I think the City of London won World War II. I think that, the World War II enabled them to consolidate control eventually of China. And, so much of the world is now, as you say, just like Starlink, it's everywhere. The global economy now is everywhere, and because we are, you've voiced the ideal of going out to the country and living off the grid, and that sounds like great advice. But they're doing things like zoning, and then with the huge purchases of land by Bill Gates and other huge, the farm, big ag and everything. There's not that many ways that you can accomplish that, while the whole globalist drive is to bring people into the cities, make them live in smaller and smaller little apartments. The 15-minute city thing is an iconic example of where the globalist economy is driving us. And, so no, you're not going to be allowed to go out, into rural Virginia and set up that farm that you dream of. Or if you do, you're probably going to fail because you're not. They're going to cut off your water. They're going to poison something. It's like I say, there is a dark hand that these powers are willing to use, and if you start looking too successful on your own, something's going to happen. The common people of the world are simply getting fleeced and driven into very, very difficult circumstances, and in which no politician seems to be pointing the answer. I agree that the Trump administration so far is a big disappointment in terms of making America great again, and it's also on not making much progress in making America healthy again. But the people that voted for Trump are still there, and what is that, 80 million people, and then there has to be some way to sustain the idea of personal sovereignty and guaranteed by the national sovereignty of our founding documents and our system. Look at the Supreme Court, and they're very, very oriented towards the existing capitalist system. I think we could spend a lot of time looking at the individual justices, but we see Justice Roberts, remember how he was so stressed about Citizens United and went over to Malta to consult with the great poobahs of Malta. Now he's gone over to, is it Slovakia or somewhere to consult with one of the, anyway, the idea of our Supreme Court, we've got to have a Supreme Court that we all believe is going to govern the law of this country in a way that protects the rights guaranteed in the Constitution. And that right now is kind of also on a slippery slope to falling to the globalists, in my opinion. So many ways that they have attacked our system, but our system is still there. It's like a house that has the structure is still there, but the guts are being taken out. and getting ready for ultimate destruction.
Someone made a comment, all the more reason to run for local office, and I laughed because I don't think that's the solution. It's one part of the solution. And if there's someone who has, you need capitals, you need financing. Either you have to be a self-made, I interviewed Michael Arbon in Australia. He ran, so he's a successful entrepreneur. He's made piles of money on his own, and he ran for office in Australia. He didn't succeed, but he's an advisor to Senator Ralph Babbitt, who did succeed. And Babbitt is also a self-made man who made a pile of money, I guess, in real estate or whatever. And so, I mean, if you're going to run for office, you need to have money, or you need to have a patron. I mean, this is not really, for me, this is like, this shows how democracy is a bit of a sham. It's oligarchic in nature, where you can't run for office in general unless you don't have, if you don't have oligarchy behind you. But in my case here in Mexico, I can't run for office. I mean, look at the news just this week. It's mind-blowing. I'm in Guadalajara, literally down the street, like 5-10 minutes away, a hairdresser got blown away in her salon. She was some, pretty woman, Barbie-like figure, had a huge following on TikTok, Instagram. I think she was messing around with narcos. But just the fact that just down the street, a hairdresser, and come in, you can see the video, they shot her up. And then also in the other part of town, at a taco stand, there were two security guys. They had done work at the U.S. Embassy here. There was a drive-by that killed them and injured other Mexicans eating tacos. I could have been at that taco stand eating tacos. One politician last week was taken out along with 3 of her supporters. The week before, another politician in the eastern part of the state having lunch in a restaurant was taken out. So if I were to run for office in Mexico, I wouldn't last long. So that's not a winning strategy for me where I am. In another country, look what happened in Romania. The anti-globalist candidate, it's magically somehow always the pro-EU, pro-globalist, pro-NATO wins. And Pavel Durov of Telegram said French intelligence had reached out to him to ask him to censor the channels that were pro these anti-globalist Romanian candidates. But what I was also going to say, because you mentioned Starlink earlier, I put this in my analysis this week. I mean, this was mind-blowing. When you look at the tariffs, there was a news story, I think it was an exclusive from Washington Post, which said the tariffs, it's a big topic. There's many moving parts, but one of them that was interesting was being used as a weapon in places like Africa and other parts of the world to get countries to acquiesce to installing Starlink. So it was like in Lesotho in Africa or some other places, they were saying, look, we'll give you mercy, we'll ease up the tariffs, but you have to accept a Starlink license. So they took 10-year license. So what does that do? That installs the global oligocracy. So it's like, we're gonna implement tariffs, but install the surveillance SpaceX Starlink network. And then it's like the carrot and the stick, and they took it. So they said, okay, we'll give you a 10-year license to operate Starlink and get all of these Africans on board the digital ghetto. Just don't tariff us, And so that was wild. And Simon Dixon, I've interviewed him long ago on the podcast. I should get him back. He's a crypto guy, I think, out in the UK. He did a very fascinating 2-3 hour podcast live stream at his channel a few days ago. And he called it BlackRock versus the world, and kind of what you were saying earlier to the British. And I agree with him. He says, on the one hand, multipolarity is kind of a head fake, although he remains somehow very optimistic with all of this. But he says that the BlackRock vampire squid, whatever you want to call it, the BlackRock Dutch East India British company, they have extracted from the West. And so there's not any more return on investment from the West. They've sucked it dry. And now they're interested in the global South and the East, where there's a huge return on investment, India, BRICS countries. So now they're pivoting to those countries. They're going to invest there. And in the initial term, it's going to be good for everyone, for BlackRock, for the BRICS countries. There's going to be huge growth. But he says over the long term, what they will do is implement the same vampire squid model that was in the West in the East. So, in India and all those places, they're going to try and set up these big central banks and, neoliberal extraction models, taxes, fees and all that. And so I thought that was a fascinating what he said. And I guess my final point is on the 15-minute city stuff. That's really what's advancing. And, this week I saw some stories where in Florida, a couple were hit with a $91,000 property tax. Absolutely. They bought a property, they were remodeling, and then the government said, hey, you owe us 90 grand property tax because of how we assessed it. And, I was looking, my water pressure last week from the house has halved. And it's, I have a storage system, but when I'm out in the front and I try to, because it comes direct from the street, it's like, so they just decreased the water pressure. So that's how it's going to be going forward. Like, in your 15-minute gulag, it's going to be very dystopian. Like, oh, we just have your water pressure. And then we might in the future have days where no water certain hours of the day, or maybe certain days no water. My electricity went out twice last night, so you'll have intermittent electricity, intermittent water. They can increase we had to change our license plates yesterday. My wife successfully achieved it with new QR code license plates.
Oh boy.
They got QR codes in Mexico, and it's like the digital, and you had to get the new license plates. And again, just this waste of time and energy. The website didn't even work. You couldn't even make an appointment. So they force you. They're like, change your license plates or else we're going to find you and take away your car. And it's like, okay, we paid. I can't even make an appointment. It says, if you have problems, call the support line. We called. Nobody answers. Send an email. We sent an email. Nobody answers. And so, it's just on and on. These really it's like the movie Brazil from 1985. I keep going back to it. It's just it's this idiocracy, Kafkaesque idiocracy mixed with technocracy. So it's Kafkaesque, really, at the end of the day. But what do? You just keep on trucking with having a good disposition, being able to laugh at this insanity. I think that's important. Just we shouldn't get like depressed. We should laugh at this insanity.
We should. I'll tell you though, to me, it's difficult. The I've been working on this project since a good 10 years now. When I was able to slow down my law practice and start trying to answer the big questions of life, like especially what happened to my dad. Why did he die of cancer at such a young age, and while he was working at a very secret occupation in the Pentagon? And the fact that I, as the only and the oldest son, felt a huge weight on my shoulders to try to understand, what happened to my dad. And so I pursued that, and in pursuing that, I've studied so much of the history, especially from say 1940 to now. And it's clear to me that this all is being orchestrated from behind the scenes in order to achieve exactly what you just described, that Kafkaesque prison planet, the Aldous Huxley, the Orwellian 1984 world, where psychologically as well as physically, we're basically automatons, part of something that we'll never know who's running it or what we can do to save ourselves. So no, I can't laugh at it right now. I
can. I don't know.
I'm open to jokes though, if you got any good ones.
No, it's just I'm bad at recalling jokes, but I also look at it as a game. Like I still retain a lot of my inner child, and I can be really childish at times. Like I've got a bunch of practical jokes here, like exploding cigarettes and gum that tastes like garlic and shock pens and exploding pens. So I'm a practical joker, but forgetting my point. What was my point? That
That you can laugh at it.
right, all of this that's coming, I also find it entertaining in a way as a game where trying to put spokes in their wheels, because there's always going to be places where you can put spokes in this system, and we can mess with their. It's always been like that, and so I find that, and that's one way to fight back and eventually get the house of cards to collapse. Again, it goes back to what we're saying earlier. If enough people did that, if enough people didn't comply, so that's always. I think that's our way of fighting back. As I said earlier, it's this tug of war, and there are times where people get too comfortable. I mean, you mentioned Huxley. That's their strategy: getting people comfortable, and
Yeah.
then bringing in, as with comfort, to bring them into the brave new world, so they don't realize what's happening. And so, but then as the water starts to rise, they're like, oh, we better do something. And so again, it's that tug of war, and I don't see what else we can do except what we're doing now: resisting tyranny, not complying, trying to warn other people. And then we saw when the tyranny came quickly with COVID, there was a quick reaction of a certain mass of people to hold it back from going further, right? And so,
Yes, yeah, and I was part of that, and I'm glad I was, and yeah, I do what I can. I'm sure a lot of people are doing what they can. Uh, so you know, it sounded to me like you basically given up, and you're sitting back and just watching it and trying to find some way maybe to spike the engine so that it stops working as you observe. But you're also educating people on a huge scale as to the details of all the ways that this is coming down. And yeah, I was talking yesterday a show with Anton Chaikin about his new book, and he's somebody that retains the idea that the American dream is still there. It's something that people just need to be educated. We need to learn the real history, and that's what he does. That's what you're doing, and that's what I'm trying to do with the energy I have to contribute. So yeah, let's see. We got a joke here. Why don't anteaters ever get sick? They have lots of antibodies in them.
yeah.
Okay. All right.
Uh,
And
uh,
little antibodies.
I like when someone says circumvent rather than oppose and don't comply. I think that's one of the best ways to go, not to go head on, but just avoid and not comply. And I wanted to show here. I've got my jokes. This is actually a pack. I don't smoke. It was a pack of Marlboros, and you open it up. And so what I did was I bought a pack of Marlboros. I emptied out the Marlboro cigarettes, and then I reemplaced them. These are all exploding cigarettes except for one. So you take it, you start smoking it, and at some point, I mean, it's harmless, but it's very loud and powerful. It explodes because they place those little things somewhere. They wrap the tobacco, and then it explodes in the person's face. And there's one I know which one it is. I don't smoke, but I can smoke if I need to or want to. And so when I go to another party or hang out with friends, I'm gonna take the one that doesn't explode, smoke it, and offer. You just leave it on the table, and someone will always be like, "Oh, can I have a cigarette?" And I'll be like, I gotta hide the smirk from my face. I'll be like, "Yeah, go, sure, take one." So, but
All right, your inner child is alive and well, Hervoye. I can see that, and I hope you enjoy your next party trick. Thanks again for another hour, Hervoye. A lot of heavy stuff today. I think I needed to talk about it, and I'm glad to hear your opinion on all these things, Professor.
stay safe, sane, and sanitized.
All right, I'll take that advice. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you again on Thursday. Bye bye.